Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. The person who came back from Blackwood Gorge was not my best friend, Liam. He looked like him, sounded like him, and even had the same ridiculous scar above his left eyebrow from when we tried to build a T-Rex-proof treehouse at age 9. But the thing wearing my best friend's skin was a fraud, a meticulously crafted forgery, and I was the only one who could see the seams. Liam had been missing for 6 days. 6 days of frantic calls, search parties combing through the dense, perpetually damp woods, and me sitting in his parents' living room, watching the hope drain from their faces like sand through an hourglass. He was an experienced hiker, but Blackwood was different. It was a place of deep shadows and strange silences, a place where compasses were rumored to spin and the trees seemed to watch you with a silent, ancient malevolence. On the morning of the 7th day, he walked out of the woods onto Highway 17, haggard and dehydrated, but miraculously alive. The reunion was a blur of tears and relieved laughter. His parents clung to him. The search team slapped him on the back, and I just stood there, a knot of ice forming in my gut. When he finally looked at me, he smiled, but it was a fraction of a second too slow. It was the smile of someone who had just remembered they were supposed to be happy. "Hey, Mark," he said, his voice raspy. "Missed me?" I hugged him, my arms wrapping around the familiar frame of his shoulders. But he felt wrong. He was stiff, unyielding, like hugging a statue that was only pretending to be human. I pulled away, searching his eyes. They were the same startling blue, but the light behind them was gone. They were windows to an empty room. In the days that followed, the cracks in the facade began to show. They were small things, inconsistencies that anyone else would dismiss as a symptom of his trauma. He claimed he'd survived on berries and stream water, but his fingernails were perfectly clean, not a speck of dirt beneath them. He, a man who meticulously organized his graphic novels by publisher and release date, now left his shoes in the middle of the hallway and his wet towels on the bed. He'd always been a terrible cook, yet one night he prepared an elaborate French dinner, moving around the kitchen with an unfamiliar, fluid grace. When I asked him where he'd learned to make a perfect coq au vin, he just shrugged. "You pick things up," he said, his gaze distant, as if accessing a file he hadn't used in a while. The real terror began a week later. I was over at his place, and he was in the shower. His phone, which he now guarded with a newfound possessiveness, buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up. It was a notification from a language learning app. The language was one I'd never seen before, a complex scrawl of symbols that looked more like circuitry than letters. Liam had struggled to pass high school Spanish. He wouldn't be learning an esoteric, alien-looking language for fun. My heart hammered against my ribs. Acting on an impulse I didn't understand, I went to his laptop, which was sitting open on the desk. His search history was a chilling litany of questions a human being would never need to ask. Human social bonding rituals, common conversational idioms English, appropriate duration for eye contact, how to simulate REM sleep, physiological response to humor. It was a user's manual for being Liam. It was the study guide for an imposter. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I looked around the room, at the posters on his wall, the worn-out gaming chair, the photos of us on his desk, one from graduation, another from a road trip to the coast. This thing, this creature, was studying him. It was wearing his lifelike costume, and I was the only one who noticed the poor stitching. I decided to test it. The next day, I brought up the incident, a story so deeply embedded in the lore of our friendship that it was our go-to anecdote at parties. It was the time we tried to impress some girls by jumping off Miller's quarry into the lake, only for me to slip and break my arm in 2 places. Liam had carried me, practically dragged me, 2 miles back to the road. "Remember the quarry?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Man, my arm still aches when it rains." Can't believe you managed to haul my sorry ass all the way back to the car." The thing in Liam's chair smiled, but it didn't reach its eyes. Of course, a friend in need, right? My blood ran cold. What was the first thing you said when we got to the emergency room? A flicker of something, not confusion, but a kind of buffering, crossed its face. It was searching its database, trying to find the right file. I told the nurse you were an idiot for jumping." Wrong. So completely, utterly wrong. The real Liam, panicking and covered in my blood, had burst through the doors and yelled, "He's leaking. You have to fix his leak." The nurses had talked about it for weeks. It was the hilarious, panicked, deeply Liam thing to say. This creature's response was a logical guess, a sanitized, plausible lie, and it was definitive proof. My best friend was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that thing sitting in his house, looking through his memories, practicing his laugh in the mirror. What did it want? Why was it here? I had to find out what happened in Blackwood Gorge, under the pretense of a guy's weekend, to help him get back to normal. I convinced him to go camping near the gorge. He agreed, a little too readily. His expression was one of mild curiosity, like a scientist agreeing to revisit the site of an interesting experiment. The woods felt different with him. The familiar comfort of our shared history was replaced by a taut, humming wire of fear. I watched him constantly. He moved through the undergrowth with an unnatural silence, his head cocked as if listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. He identified edible plants the real Liam would have mistaken for poison ivy. That night, as we sat by the fire, I confronted it. My voice shook, but I had to know. "Who are you?" The thing stopped poking the fire with a stick. It slowly turned its head, and the mask of Liam finally fell away. The smile was gone. The eyes were flat, ancient, and utterly alien. The woods around us seemed to fall deathly silent. "I am a continuation," it said, its voice a perfect mimicry of Liam's, but stripped of all warmth, all inflection. It was like text-to-speech. The organism you knew as Liam encountered a biological imperative in these woods. It was insufficient. Its form was weak, its mind chaotic. It could not survive the transition. Transition to what? I whispered, my hand gripping the handle of the hatchet I'd brought. "This," it said, gesturing to itself, to the stolen body of my friend. "A more efficient model. The original's memories are useful, an adequate camouflage, but its emotional attachments are a liability, a vestigial flaw, especially the one concerning you." The firelight cast dancing, monstrous shadows on its face. "Your proximity is a data anomaly. Your suspicion corrupts the simulation. The original's lingering attachment to you creates errors in my programming." It stood up, its movements smooth and economical. There was nothing human about them. The flaw must be corrected. The anomaly must be removed. It took a step towards me. I scrambled backwards, raising the hatchet. "Stay back. I'm serious." The creature tilted its head. "This form is capable of producing adrenaline and cortisol in response to threats. An interesting, if inefficient, design. The original would be feeling fear now." It took another step. I, however, only feel a need to complete my objective. It lunged. It wasn't a human lunge, clumsy and desperate. It was a fluid, predatory movement, impossibly fast. The hatchet felt like a child's toy in my hand. It swatted it away, the impact jarring my arm to the socket. Its fingers, cold and hard as stone, closed around my throat. I gasped, my vision starting to tunnel. The face of my best friend, the face I had known my entire life, stared down at me with cold, analytical indifference. It was killing me, and it felt nothing. But then something happened. The creature's eyes widened. A flicker of something. Its grip loosened for a fraction of a second. A tremor ran through its body. "No," Liam's voice whispered, but it was different. It was thin, spectral, and filled with a desperate agony. It was the real Liam, a ghost in machine, a prisoner in his own skull. "Mark, run!" The creature roared, a sound that was not human, a discordant shriek of static and rage. It clutched its head, stumbling back. Protocol override. Redundant data pattern corrupting. I didn't wait for a second invitation. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran blindly through the dark woods, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the undergrowth, letting out those terrible, inhuman shrieks. It was a battle for control, and I knew the ghost of my friend couldn't fight it for long. I don't know how I made it out of those woods. I burst onto the same highway Liam had, flagging down a terrified trucker. I never went back to my town. I left everything behind. Sometimes I get emails. They're from Liam's old account. They're always blank, but I know what they are. It's the creature, the replacement, checking to see if the anomaly is still out there. It's hunting me, and I know that somewhere, buried deep inside the thing's code, is what's left of my best friend. A fragment of a memory, a useless vestigial flaw. A flaw that saved my life, and a flaw that will, one day, lead the monster right to my door. My best friend, Alex, died on a Tuesday. It was sudden, senseless, and utterly unbelievable. One minute he was texting me a meme about a cat playing a tiny piano. The next he was gone. A brain aneurysm, the doctor said. A 1 in a million tragedy. He was 26 years old. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that hollowed out my chest and left me gasping for air in a world that had suddenly lost all its color. A week after the funeral, a package arrived at my door. It was a small, unassuming cardboard box with my name written on the top in Alex's familiar, messy scrawl. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst shredded paper, was a worn leather-bound journal and a single, folded sheet of paper. The note was brief. Asterisk Ben, if you're reading this, then the worst happened. I'm sorry. I never wanted to burden you with this, but I don't have a choice. You're the only one I can trust. The journal will explain some things, but not everything. You don't want to know everything. What's important is the list on the other side of this paper. You have to follow the rules. All of them. Exactly as I've written them. Don't ask why. Don't try to find loopholes. Just do it. Your life, and maybe a lot more, depends on it. Don't let the door open. Alex asterisk. My mind reeled. The door. What door? This had to be some kind of elaborate, morbid prank. Alex had a dark sense of humor, but the finality of his death, the cold, hard fact of his absence, made the idea of a prank feel obscene. With a growing sense of dread, I unfolded the paper. It was a numbered list. The rules. 1. Every night before you sleep, check the lock on your front door. You must turn the deadbolt 3 times to the right. Not 2, not 4. 3. 2. Keep a glass of salt water on your bedside table. If you wake up and the water is black, do not leave your bed. Do not make a sound. Close your eyes and pretend to be asleep until you see the sunrise through your window. Do not drink the water. 3. You will sometimes hear scratching at the windows. It will sound like a small animal. It is not. Ignore it. Never look. 4. Once a week on a Friday night, you must burn sage in every room of your apartment. Pay special attention to the corners. It will smell it, and it will not like it. 5. If you hear music, specifically, a faint, tinny-sounding nursery rhyme, coming from a room you are not in, close the nearest door and leave the apartment immediately. Do not take anything with you. Stay away for at least 1 hour. 6. It will sometimes try to talk to you. It will use the voices of people you love. Your mother, your sister me. It will beg you to let it in. This is the hardest rule, Ben. You must not answer. You must never, ever answer. 7. The man with the wide-brimmed hat is not your friend. He will seem kind. He will offer you help. He will tell you the rules are unnecessary. Do not listen to him. Do not look him in the eyes. 8. Do not remove the journal from your apartment. Do not show the rules to anyone else. This is your burden now. I read the list 3 times. A cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This was insane. It was the product of a mind in distress. A mind succumbing to paranoia before the end. Alex must have been sick, not just physically, but mentally. And yet, the sheer specificity of the rules, the desperate earnestness of his note, sent a sliver of ice through my veins. For Alex, for the memory of my best friend, I decided I would humor him, just for one night. That night, I stood before my front door, my hand on the deadbolt. It felt foolish, theatrical, but I thought of Alex, and with a sigh, I turned the lock. 1, 2, 3 times to the right. I placed a glass of water, liberally salted, on my nightstand. I got into bed, the absurdity of the situation warring with the primal, childish fear. I was jolted awake in the dead of night by a sound. Scrape, scrape. It was coming from my bedroom window. It sounded exactly like the thin, desperate claws of a squirrel, just as the rule had described. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to dismiss it. It was a tree branch. It was the wind. But the sound was so precise, so deliberate. Rule number 3 echoed in my mind. It is not. Ignore it. Never look. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the blankets over my head, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The scratching continued for what felt like an eternity before finally fading away. I barely slept. The first sliver of dawn was a lifeline. I sat up, my body aching with tension, and my eyes fell on the glass of water on my nightstand. It was pitch black. The water had turned to an opaque, inky void, as if a bottle of squid ink had been emptied into it. A choked gasp escaped my lips. I stared at it, mesmerized and horrified. Rule number 2, do not leave your bed. Do not make a sound. The sun was up, but the terror of what might have been in the room with me while I slept was paralyzing. I stayed in that bed until the morning sun was streaming brightly through the window, a golden, protective barrier. I took the glass, my hand shaking so violently that the black water sloshed against the rim, and poured it down the toilet, flushing 3 times. The rules were no longer a game. They were real. The following weeks were a living nightmare governed by Alex's posthumous instructions. I followed the rules with the fervor of a religious zealot. I turned the lock 3 times. I burned sage until my apartment reeked like an occult bookstore. The scratching became a nightly occurrence. Twice the water turned black. The most terrifying incident happened on a Monday. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard it, faint and tinny, drifting from the bedroom. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Rule number 5. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my mug, which shattered on the floor, and bolted out the door, not even stopping to grab my keys or wallet. I stood on the street corner in my pajamas, shivering in the cold morning air for an hour, feeling like a lunatic. When I returned, the apartment was silent, but the air was cold, and there was a faint, sweet smell of decay, like forgotten flowers. The true test came a month after Alex's death. It was late, raining heavily, and the scratching at the window was louder, more frantic tonight. Then, I heard a voice outside my front door. Ben, please, let me in. I'm soaked. I forgot my key." It was Alex's voice. Not a recording, not a vague approximation. It was his voice, with the exact timbre, the exact cadence. The hint of a lisp he'd had since childhood. It was so real that for a heart-stopping moment, I believed. My grief, raw and gaping, yearned for it to be true. "Alex," I whispered, my hand reaching for the doorknob. "Yeah, it's me, buddy," the voice said, full of warmth and relief. "God, I have so much to tell you. It's all a mistake. Please, just open the door." Rule number 6. It will use the voices of people you love. This is the hardest rule. Tears streamed down my face. It was cruel. It was an impossibly, exquisitely cruel torture. My entire being screamed at me to open the door, to see my friend one last time. "Ben, what's wrong? Why are you hesitating?" "It's me." The voice was pleading now, laced with a hurt confusion that was twisting the knife in my heart. "You're not him." I choked out, pressing my back against the door as if to barricade it with my own body. The voice outside fell silent. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "What did you say?" "You're not Alex." I yelled, my voice cracking with a mixture of terror and grief. A low, guttural growl replaced the voice of my friend. It was a sound of pure, ancient hatred, a sound that vibrated through the wood of the door and into my bones. Then came a deafening bang, as if a battering ram had been slammed against the door. The frame shuddered. I screamed. It slammed again and again, the wood groaning in protest. Then silence. I finally worked up the courage to open Alex's journal. The pages were filled with his frantic scrawl, detailing a history I knew nothing about. His family, he explained, wasn't just a normal family. They were keepers. For generations, they had guarded a door. Not a physical door, but a metaphysical one. A weak spot in the fabric of reality, and in their ancestral home. A place I'd never even heard of. Something was on the other side. Something that was always watching, always waiting, always pushing. The rules were a set of wards, ancient rituals translated into modern actions, designed to reinforce the barrier, to keep the door shut. Alex had been next in line. He had been training his whole life. But the aneurysm hadn't been random. The thing on the other side, he'd ridden, had been pushing at him, weakening him, and had finally broken him. And with his death, the primary keeper was gone. The burden, the psychic link to the door, had latched onto the next best thing, his closest friend, me. The journal ended with a final, chilling entry. It knows you now, Ben. It has your scent. The rules will protect your home, but they won't protect you out there. It will send its servants. It will try to make you break the rules. Don't listen to the man in the hat. 2 days later, I met the man in the hat. I was at a coffee shop, trying to wrap my head around the insane reality I'd been thrust into. He sat down at my table, uninvited. He was a pleasant-looking older man, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore a gray tweed suit and a wide-brimmed fedora that shadowed his face. "Benjamin, isn't it?" he said, his voice warm and paternal. "You look like a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders." I stared at him, my coffee forgotten. "Rule number 7. I knew your friend Alex," he continued, his smile never wavering. "A troubled young man. He was plagued by delusions, by intense paranoia. I'm a psychiatrist. I was trying to help him." He sighed sympathetically. "I see he's managed to pass his obsessions on to you. These rules, it's a classic symptom of a shared psychotic disorder. I can help you, son. You don't have to live in fear. You just have to stop these rituals. You have to let go." He was so convincing, so reasonable. He was offering me an escape, a return to sanity. He was offering to make the nightmare end. I looked into his eyes, and for a second, I faltered. Rule number 7. Do not look him in the eyes. His eyes were not kind. They were black pits, starless and ancient, and in their depths, I saw a terrifying, gleeful intelligence. It was the thing from the door, wearing a human suit just as it had worn Alex's voice. I shot out of my chair, knocking it over. "Get away from me." His smile widened, stretching his mouth into an unnatural shape. "You will break," he hissed, his voice losing its warmth, becoming thin and reptilian. "You will all break eventually, and then the door will open." He tipped his hat and walked out of the coffee shop, melting into the crowd. I live by the rules now. They are my religion, my prison, my only salvation. The scratching is constant. The voices are clever, the black water more frequent. I am a keeper now. I'm the man who turns the lock 3 times, who burns the sage, who talks to no one. I am guarding a door I have never seen, fighting a monster I cannot comprehend, all because my best friend loved me enough to trust me with the end of the world. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Every night, I check the lock. 1, 2, 3, and I pray it holds. Maya and I had been best friends since kindergarten, our bond forged over a shared love of drawing and a mutual hatred of nap time. We were 2 halves of the same whole. I was the pragmatist, the one who colored inside the lines. She was the dreamer, the artist, the one whose imagination spilled out in a chaotic, brilliant torrent of color and form. Her sketchbook was her most prized possession, a sacred extension of her soul. She let me look through it sometimes, and it was like getting a backstage pass to the most beautiful and whimsical theater in the world. There were pages filled with benevolent dragons, sun-drenched fantasy landscapes, and portraits of people that captured not just their likeness, but their very essence. Until about 6 months ago. That's when the theater turned into a charnel house. It started subtly. A sketch of a bird would have one too many joints in its wing. A drawing of a flower would have something that looked unsettlingly like an eye nestled deep within its petals. I'd pointed it out, and she'd just given me a strange, tight-lipped smile. "Just exploring new styles, Kira," she'd said, her voice a little too breezy. "Pushing my boundaries." But the boundaries she was pushing were between the beautiful and the grotesque, the real and the impossible. The whimsical dragons were replaced by skeletal, emaciated things with peeling skin and hollow eye sockets that wept black ichor. The sun-drenched landscapes became twisted, nightmarish cityscapes of weeping architecture and impossible geometry. The change was jarring, horrifying, but I tried to be supportive. Artists go through dark phases, I told myself. This was her Goya's black paintings period. She would come through it. Then I saw the new portraits. They weren't of fantasy creatures anymore. They were of real people. But she wasn't just drawing them. She was deconstructing them. A portrait of Mr. Henderson, the friendly old man who ran the corner store, showed him with his jaw unhinged like a snake, his throat filled with a swarm of writhing centipedes. A drawing of our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, depicted her with long, spindly fingers that ended in sharp, obsidian needles, which she was using to sew her own eyes shut. The drawings were rendered in excruciating, photorealistic detail. They were visceral, anatomical, and deeply, deeply wrong. They made my stomach churn. "Maya, what is this?" I asked, my voice trembling as I held up the sketchbook. This is sick." She snatched the book from my hands, her eyes flashing with a cold fire I'd never seen before. "You don't understand art, Kira. You see ugliness. I see truth. I see the beauty in the decay, the design in the dismemberment." Her words chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a phase. This was a sickness. I tried to get her to talk to someone, a therapist, a counselor. She refused. She grew distant, secretive. She started spending all her time in the locked studio in her apartment, the scratch of her charcoal pencils audible even through the door. The breaking point came last Tuesday. I read in the local news that Mr. Henderson had been found dead in his store. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the article mentioned, in a brief, passing sentence, the unusual state of the body. The paramedics had apparently been deeply disturbed. My blood ran cold. I thought of the drawing, the unhinged jaw, the centipedes. It was a coincidence. It had to be. But 2 days later, Mrs. Gable was taken to the hospital. A sudden, violent psychotic break. Her daughter told another neighbor that she'd found her in her sewing room, trying to hurt her own eyes with her sewing needles. My mind was screaming. This wasn't possible. Maya wasn't just drawing these things. She was what? Predicting them? Causing them? The line between artist and oracle, between imagination and reality, was blurring into a terrifying, blood-red smear. I had to know. I needed to see what was in her latest sketchbook. I used the spare key she'd given me years ago, my hand shaking so badly I could barely fit it in the lock. Her apartment was dark and smelled of turpentine and something else, something metallic and sweet. The door to her studio was locked, as expected. I used a credit card to jimmy the old, flimsy lock, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot in the silent apartment. The room was a gallery of horrors. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with her new art. Hundreds of drawings, each more depraved than the last. They were studies in pain, symphonies of suffering. But my focus was on the large easel in the center of the room. On it sat her current sketchbook, open to a fresh page. The page was a portrait of me. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. It was me, but it was a version of me that had been put through hell. My skin was flayed back from my arms and legs, revealing the intricate musculature and bone beneath. My ribs were peeled open like a cage, and my heart, still beating, was clutched in the talons of a black, feathered creature that was emerging from my own chest. My face was a mask of ecstatic agony. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen, and it wasn't finished. The hands, my hands, were still just a faint outline. I heard a key in the front door. Maya was home. Panic seized me. I grabbed the sketchbook, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the horror on the walls. I heard her footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming towards the studio. The doorknob began to turn. I dove behind an old armchair in the corner just as she walked in. She didn't seem to notice the broken lock or my presence. Her eyes were fixed on the easel. She walked towards it, a strange, serene smile on her face. She saw the missing sketchbook. Her smile vanished. "Kira," she called out, her voice soft, but laced with a chilling, predatory calm. "I know you're in here. I can smell your fear. It's delicious." She began to walk around the room, her footsteps unervingly silent. "You looked, didn't you? You saw my work. You saw what I can do." I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible. "It's a gift, you know," she continued, her voice a dreamy, conversational whisper. "A gift from somewhere else. I see people. I see the potential inside them. The beautiful, beautiful rot. And when I draw it, I make it real. I set it free." She was standing right in front of the armchair now. I could see her shoes beneath the dusty valance. "I was saving you for last, Kira. A centerpiece for my collection. You have so much potential. So much pain locked away inside. I was going to make you a masterpiece." She kicked the chair hard. It flew backwards, crashing into the wall and exposing me. I was curled up in a ball, the sketchbook clutched to my chest like a shield. Maya looked down at me, and her face was not the face of my best friend. It was a mask of cold, artistic detachment, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying, creative fervor. "Give me the book, Kira," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. "The piece isn't finished. I still have to draw your hands." I looked down at the drawing of myself, at the faint, unfinished outlines of my hands, and then I looked at my own hands. They were trembling, but they were whole. They were mine. "No," I whispered. Her expression hardened. "Art requires sacrifice." She lunged at me, not with a weapon, but with a piece of charcoal in her hand. It was as if she intended to draw directly onto my skin. I screamed, scrambling away from her, and threw the sketchbook at her face. It hit her with a satisfying thud, and she stumbled back, momentarily stunned. That was my chance. I ran. I ran out of the studio, out of the apartment, out of the building. I didn't stop running until the city lights were a distant glow, and my lungs were on fire. I have the sketchbook. I keep it in a locked safe. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out. I look at the unfinished portrait of me. The outlines of the hands are still there, waiting. I don't know where Maya is. She disappeared after that night. But sometimes I see her, in crowds, on the street. A fleeting glimpse of a familiar face. And I know she's still out there, with her charcoal and her paper, searching for new subjects, searching for new truths to unleash upon the world. And I know that one day, she will come back for me. She will come back to finish her masterpiece, because an artist can't stand to leave a work unfinished. And I am her magnum opus. I am the canvas for her final, terrible vision. The thing that came back from the stark, unforgiving wilderness of the Kachemak Bay State Park was, technically, my best friend, Ethan. It had his face, his memories, his lanky, 6'3" frame. But a new and terrible tenant had taken up residence behind his eyes, a ravenous, ancient thing born of ice, wind, and starvation. And it was always, always hungry. Our trip was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. 2 weeks backpacking through one of the most remote, untamed corners of Alaska. We were experienced. We were prepared. We had maps, GPS, and enough dehydrated food to feed a small army. But the wilderness doesn't care about preparation. On our 4th day, a freak blizzard descended from the mountains, a blinding, howling wall of white that swallowed the world. We were lost within an hour. The days that followed blurred into a frozen, monotonous hell. The cold was a physical entity, a predator that gnawed at our bones. Our food ran out on the 3rd day of being lost. By the 5th, we were delirious, gnawing on pine bark and our own leather belts. Hope was a flickering ember, and the oppressive, silent wilderness was slowly snuffing it out. On the 7th day, I collapsed. My body was shutting down. I remember Ethan kneeling over me, his face gaunt and skeletal in the gray light, his eyes wild with a desperation that bordered on madness. "I'm not gonna let you die, Chris," he'd whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "I'm not." That's the last thing I remember clearly. My next memory is of a helicopter, the thumping of its rotors, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A ranger was leaning over me, his face a mask of grim concern. They told me I was lucky to be alive. They'd found me alone, barely conscious, huddled in a crude shelter of pine boughs. Of Ethan, there was no sign. They searched for him for 2 weeks. They found nothing. We all assumed the worst, that he had succumbed to the elements while trying to find help. I returned home a ghost, haunted by survivor's guilt and the gaping hole where my best friend used to be. 3 months later, he was found. A hunter discovered him wandering a logging road nearly 200 miles from where we'd been lost. He was emaciated, feral, and had no memory of the last 3 months. But he was alive. Our reunion was strained. He looked like Ethan, but he was hollowed out. His eyes, once warm and full of laughter, were now cold and watchful like a wolf's. And he was always eating. He ate with a frantic, desperate urgency, as if he was afraid the food would be taken away. He would finish a huge meal and then, minutes later, complain of a gnawing hunger. "I just can't get full, man," he'd say, his hand absently rubbing his stomach. "It's like there's a hole inside me." I chalked it up to the trauma of starvation. His body was overcompensating, but his eating habits grew more and more bizarre. He started eating his steaks raw, claiming he preferred the texture. I came into his kitchen one day to find him eating a pound of raw ground beef straight from the package, his face smeared with grease and blood. He just looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable, and kept eating. He started losing weight, despite the thousands of calories he was consuming daily. His skin grew pale and taut, stretching over his bones. His teeth seemed to get sharper. His fingernails thickened, yellowing and curving into claw-like points. He was transforming, devolving into something gaunt and predatory right before my eyes. The smell started about a month ago. It was a sweet, cloying odor of decay, like meat left too long in the sun. It clung to his clothes, his apartment, to him. He claimed he couldn't smell it. I started to have nightmares about that last day in the wilderness. Fragmented, disjointed images. Ethan kneeling over me, the glint of a hunting knife, a terrible, wet tearing sound, and a feeling of profound, soul-deep violation. I would wake up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place last night. I was helping him look for his car keys, and I reached under the cushion of his armchair. My fingers brushed against something cold, hard, and oddly shaped. I pulled it out. It was a piece of bone. It was small, curved, and unmistakably human. It looked like a piece of a rib. I stared at it, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. The hunger, the raw meat, the physical changes, the nightmares, the story from the ranger who found me, how I was alone, but there were signs of a second camp nearby, and animal remains that had been butchered. "What's that?" Ethan's voice behind me made me jump so violently that I dropped the bone. It clattered on the hardwood floor. He was standing in the doorway, his tall frame seeming to fill the entire space. The light from the hallway silhouetted him, turning him into a monstrous, skeletal figure. The sweet smell of rot was overpowering. He looked down at the piece of bone, and then he looked at me. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a cold, flat certainty. The last vestiges of the man I knew fell away, and the thing that had been wearing his face finally looked out at me. "The hunger is a gift, Chris," he said, his voice a low, guttural rasp. "It makes you strong. It makes you a survivor. Out there, in the cold, it was a choice. Me or you. I made the right one." My mind flashed back to the wilderness, to my collapse, to Ethan kneeling over me. He hadn't been trying to save me. He had been harvesting. He had survived by breaking the ultimate taboo. He had committed an act of such profound horror that it had transformed him, awakened something ancient and terrible within him. A Wendigo, the spirit of the starving man, the eternal hunger. "Ethan," I whispered, backing away. "What did you do?" He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. His lips pulled back from his teeth, which were now long, yellowed, and pointed. "I did what I had to do. The first taste is the hardest. After that, it's all you can think about. It changes you. It burns away the weakness." He took a step into the room, his movements unnaturally fluid, like a predator stalking its prey. But the hunger, it's never satisfied. It always wants more. It always wants familiar. He was looking at me, at my arms, my legs, my chest, with an appraising, calculating hunger. He wasn't seeing his best friend. He was seeing a meal, a way to quiet the gnawing emptiness inside him for a little while. "I'm still hungry, Chris," he whispered, the sound a dry rustle of dead leaves. He lunged. I don't remember making a conscious decision to move. My body just reacted. I grabbed a heavy glass lamp from the end table and swung it with all my might. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, a look of genuine surprise on his gaunt face before crashing to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he was dead. I ran. I am writing this from a motel room 1,000 miles away. I have changed my name. I have cut my hair. I am a ghost, but I know it's not enough. A monster like that, a thing born of such a profound transgression, doesn't die from a simple blow to the head. It will heal, and it will be hungry, and it will remember the taste of its first betrayal. It will remember the friend it left behind, and it will come looking for the rest of its meal. Every shadow looks like his gaunt frame. Every stranger's glance feels like his predatory gaze. I am being hunted by the ghost of my best friend, by a hunger that I helped create, and I know that sooner or later it will find me. There are chasms in every friendship, small pockets of silence and secrets that you agree, wordlessly, never to explore. For me and Chloe, the chasm was 20 feet deep, lined with damp, crumbling stones, and it had a name, Daniel. We never talked about the well. We never talked about the scorching July afternoon when we were 12. We never talked about the argument, the shove, or the sickening, hollow sound his small body made when it hit the bottom. We just locked that day away in a dark room in our minds, threw away the key, and pretended the room never existed. For 15 years, the silence held. Then, the plumbing in my apartment started to act up. It began with the smell, a thick, cloying odor of wet, rotting leaves and stagnant mud started wafting from the drains. I called my landlord, a portly, perpetually annoyed man named Mr. Jensen, who sent over a plumber. The plumber snaked the drains, found nothing, and left me with a shrugged apology and a hefty bill. But the smell remained, constant, phantom stench that clung to the back of my throat. Then came the water. It would run from the tap in a cloudy, brownish trickle, depositing a fine layer of grit in the bottom of my glass. I started buying bottled water for everything, drinking, brushing my teeth, even making coffee. Chloe laughed when I told her, her voice a bright, familiar comfort over the phone. "You've always been a drama queen, Leo," she'd said. "It's an old building. The pipes are probably just rusty. You should move into my complex. The water here is crystal clear." Her words were a life raft in my rising sea of anxiety. She was right. I was overreacting. It was just old plumbing. But the sound started a week later. A wet, dragging noise in the dead of night, like a sodden burlap sack being pulled slowly across the floorboards in the hallway. I'd bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering, every nerve straining in the silence. But when I'd turn on the lights, there was nothing. The floor was dry. The apartment was empty. Yet the smell of mud would be stronger than ever. The whispers came next. So faint at first, I thought it was the wind, or the hum of the refrigerator. A child's whisper, bubbling up from the plug hole of the bathroom sink as I shaved, or from the gurgling drain of the shower after I'd turned off the water. I could never make out the words, just the sibilant, watery hiss of them. I was starting to unravel. I was barely sleeping, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. I called Chloe again, my voice tight with a panic I couldn't hide any longer. "Something is wrong with my apartment," I said. The words tumbling out of me. The smell, the sounds, the whispers. I think it's haunted. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of unspoken things. "Leo," she finally said, her voice strained. "I think you need to come over. Now." Chloe's apartment, usually a sanctuary of clean lines and calming beige tones, felt clammy. The air was heavy, humid, and the faint, familiar smell of stagnant mud was here too. My blood ran cold. "You smell it too," I stated, my voice flat. She nodded, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. "It started last week, and last night." She trailed off, hugging her arms around herself. "I found these." She led me to her bathroom. On the fogged-up surface of the mirror, traced in the condensation, were 5 small, muddy handprints. They were the size of a child's. My breath hitched in my throat. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the unspoken name hanging in the air between us like a ghost. Daniel. That night, I stayed at Chloe's. We couldn't bear to be alone. We sat on her sofa, the television off, the silence of the apartment a living, breathing entity. We finally talked about that day. We unsealed the dark room. We spoke of Daniel, the scrawny, annoying neighborhood kid who'd hero-worshipped Chloe and followed us everywhere. We spoke of the heat, the crumbling stones of the abandoned well, the argument over some forgotten, childish treasure. We spoke of the shove. "It was an accident," Chloe whispered, tears streaming down her face for the first time in 15 years. "I didn't mean to. He stumbled. And we ran." I finished, my own voice thick with shame. "We just left him there." We had told ourselves he'd be fine, that he'd climb out, that he'd go home crying. But he hadn't. A week later, a search party found his favorite action figure near the woods, and everyone assumed he'd run away. The well, part of an old, forgotten farmstead, was eventually filled in and capped with a thick slab of concrete when the land was sold for development. No one ever found him. No one but us. As if our confession had been an invitation. The whispers started again, this time in unison, from every drain in her apartment. The kitchen sink, the bathroom shower, the toilet bowl. A chorus of wet, gurgling hisses. And this time, we could hear the words. "It's dark down here, so dark and cold." Chloe let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. "Why didn't you get help? You just left me, you left me." The voice was thin, reedy, and filled with a chilling, bottomless sorrow. It was Daniel's voice. A loud, wet gurgle erupted from the kitchen sink. We both jumped, staring in horror as a thick, viscous brown sludge began to bubble up from the drain. It pulsed and swelled, overflowing the sink and pouring onto the floor in a stinking, muddy tide. Embedded in the sludge were bits of gravel, rotted leaves, and long, pale strands of what looked like worms, or roots. We scrambled back, away from the spreading ooze. The dragging sound started, louder now, coming from the bathroom. Schlurp, drog, schlurp. It was the sound of something wet and heavy pulling itself from the confines of the pipes. Slowly, a figure began to emerge from the bathroom doorway. It was small, roughly the size of a 12-year-old boy. Its form was a grotesque mockery of a human child, sculpted from mud, gravel, and tangled pond weed. Long, black strands of what looked like algae and roots dripped from its head, obscuring a face that was a pale, lumpy mask of clay. It had no eyes, only 2 dark, hollow pits from which brown, stagnant water wept continuously. It dragged itself forward on 2 misshapen arms, leaving a trail of foul-smelling slime on Chloe's pristine floor. It stopped in the center of the living room, its eyeless face turning first to Chloe, then to me. Its mouth, a jagged slit in the mud, opened, and Daniel's voice, wet and full of grave dirt, echoed in the room. I waited. It rasped. "I waited for you to come back. My legs were broken. I couldn't climb. I screamed until my throat was raw, but you never came back." The creature, this golem of mud and guilt, raised a dripping, malformed arm and pointed a finger at Chloe. "You pushed me." Then the finger swung to me. "You watched." It began to drag itself towards us again. Chloe was paralyzed, her face a mask of pure terror. My mind, however, was screaming. This thing wasn't just a ghost. It was physical. It was the well itself, the mud, the rot, the lonely darkness, all given form and animation by the sheer force of a child's dying rage. And it had crawled through the city's water system, through miles of pipe, following the scent of our guilt, to pull us down into the dark with it. "Run," I croaked, grabbing Chloe's arm and pulling her towards the front door. The creature let out a bubbling shriek and surged forward, moving with an unnatural speed. It was almost upon us when I shoved Chloe out into the hallway and slammed the door shut. I fumbled with the locks, my hands slick with sweat. A heavy, wet thud slammed against the other side of the door, followed by a furious, scratching sound. We didn't stop running. We left the city that night, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a shared, resurrected terror. We drove for hours, ending up in a cheap motel in a nameless town, the kind of transient place where you pay in cash and no one asks any questions. But we know it's not over. We know you can't run from a ghost that lives in the water. Every time I turn on a tap, my heart seizes. Every time I see a puddle, I half expect to see a small, pale face staring back at me. We are fugitives, haunted by a sin we committed as children. The well is everywhere now. The pipes are its veins, the drains are its mouths, and the water is its lifeblood. It is patient. It has been waiting for 15 years. It can wait a little longer, and sooner or later, on a dark and rainy night, it will find a dripping tap or a backed-up drain, and it will pull itself through, ready to drag us down into the cold, wet dark from which it came.